Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to do the video I meant to do last night, but I had some technical issues with the internet, so I'm going to pre-record it and then upload it that way. Um, so this is another one in the continuing series of me doing some more off-the-cuff random stuff. First of all, I want to mention this episode is brought to you by Audible. If you guys aren't familiar with Audible, it's a really cool website. You can go, pay $14.95 a month to get audiobooks. You get one audiobook a month for that $14.95 as well as your membership. On top of that, um, tons of really great titles. If you look in the description of this video below, you'll see a link, audibletrial.com/paranormal as E as in Edward. Again, audibletrial.com/paranormal E. If you haven't been a member of Audible before, you can sign up for a new account. You'll get a free month's membership, and you'll get a free audiobook. And in honor of that, I'm going to actually be talking about books that you can find on Audible. I want to remind you as well that if you watch the weekly radio show on Thursdays, my co-host Bryant McKinley is a published author. You can find all of his books on Audible as well. They are Ancient Blood, Ancient Enemies, and Drawing Dead. Um, really great vampire fiction. Ancient Blood and Ancient Enemies. Part one, part two of an ongoing series about basically a gamer geek type of guy who gets turned into an actual vampire and trying to deal with what vampires really are versus what people think they are. And then the second book, or the other book, Drawing Dead, vampire gangsters back in the 1930s. Lucky Luciano makes an appearance. It's absolutely awesome. Definitely go check those out. But then, as I said, this morning, technically, I'm filming in the morning. We're actually going to be talking about a pair of books by one of the most famous Christian authors in at least the last 100 years. Probably one of the most famous of all time, which is, of course, C.S. Lewis. Now, when most people think of C.S. Lewis, you probably think of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the whole Chronicles of Narnia, which is 7 books, I want to say. It's a great series. I'm not going to say that it isn't. A few people may also think of a book I'm going to talk about. The first of the 2 books I'm going to talk about, which is the Screwtape Letters, which isn't as well known. But I think the one that I happen to really like, that not as many people know, is The Great Divorce. Now, the first thing to realize about C.S. Lewis, in case this isn't blindingly obvious, is the man was a highly devout Christian and member of the Anglican Church. It undercuts just about everything he ever wrote. If you look at the Chronicles of Narnia, it's Lion Jesus. If you look at the Screwtape Letters, it's even more obvious for reasons I'm going to get into. Great Divorce, pretty obvious. He had a very unusual theological take, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But again, it undercuts everything he wrote. He even wrote probably his least known series, which I'm currently working my way through, and I'll probably make a video about in the future, called the Space Trilogy. The Silent Planet, Nunia, and what's the third one? His Terrible Wrath, which are a really interesting series in that that obviously takes place in outer space. As this man who's kidnapped and taken to Mars, interacts with life there and learns about their impressions of God and angels and things of that nature. And then the second book, he goes to Venus, and it's almost a Garden of Eden situation. I finished the first book. I'm working on the second. They're very interesting books, and the first in particular was written as Lewis's answer to the question, or as a continuation of a essay Lewis wrote about trying to resolve Christian theology with the potential of life on other planets. Again, that's kind of the big thing with Lewis, is that he tends to have a little bit different take on things, at least in my experience, than normal mainstream Christianity, in large part because of the fact, keep in mind, Anglicans, while not Roman Catholics, obviously, are a closer offshoot of the Roman Catholic Church than, say, Protestantism, have similar rituals, and a lot of similar beliefs and things, so it's not evangelical Christianity, which is what most people are probably exposed to in the United States. It's certainly the people that are usually giving longest sermons in public. I want to say the Episcopal Church is the American offshoot of Anglicanism. But probably the thing he's most famous for he wrote, of course, a book called Mere Christianity, which is his great defense of Christianity. It's probably what gives him the title of the great Christian apologist. It also, incidentally, is where Francis Collins, the head of the former head of the Human Genome Project, and the head of the National Institute of Health, that's the book he credits as converting him. Which is something we're going to get into, particularly with Screwtape, about Lewis's take on things. It's different than say, a lot of evangelical and Protestant ideas, is on the importance of reason, not the rejection of it. But before I get there, I want to tell what I think is a very interesting story. So Lewis is famous as the great Christian writer of the 20th century. But for many years he wasn't a Christian at all. He was actually an atheist. Now, how much of an atheist he was, we could argue, because in his actual writings, it was more of the stereotypical he was angry with God than an actual absolute disbelief. Despite common Christian characters, most atheists are not angry with God. It's hard to be angry with something you don't believe in. Lewis described himself as such, though he also did call himself an atheist. So that being said, some friends of his, most notably the other great fantasy writer of the 20th century, J.R.R. Tolkien, argued with him and debated with him. As I understand it, the argument made was, it may be this great story, this great work of human literature, storytelling, referring to the story of Jesus Christ, as people call it, the greatest story ever told. But that doesn't mean it isn't true. And Lewis tells the story of, he got on a motorcycle sidecar to go to the zoo. He got on to the sidecar, an atheist, and he walked away as a Christian. Which is an interesting story in its own right, but not really relevant to what it is today. So I'm going to start with the better known of the two lesser known books I'm going to talk about, which is the Screwtape Letters. For anyone who doesn't know it, it's been turned into a play. It's been turned into a decent audio drama, although I'm not quite as big a fan as I might have liked to have been by Focus on Family. There's been talk for years and years and years of trying to turn it into its movie, which is, in my opinion, really not a workable solution. Focus on Family, for the flaws I see in it, actually managed to convince me it's a little more workable than I would have thought, because it's an epistolary novel, which means it's written in the form of a series of letters. The more famous example of this type of novel, of course, is the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker. But where Dracula was written as letters and things from a series of authors, Screwtape Letters is written specifically by Screwtape. He is an undersecretary down in hell, who's writing to his nephew Wormtail, who is a younger demon who has just been appointed to corrupt the human soul on Earth. And it's a series of pieces of advice Screwtape gives him about how to condemn people. And it's a really good read, even if you're not a Christian, even if you don't fit into this worldview. Just in terms of human failings and human foibles, things that keep us on the materialist versus the spiritual. And to Lewis's credit, he's not condemning non-Christian faith. He's not a big fan of materialism per se, which is understandable given he's a Christian himself. But he's not outright denouncing. He's certainly not denouncing science, and he's not denouncing atheism per se. It's more this separation from God concept. And that's one of the first things I really like. One of the reasons I really like this book. Now, there's very much an anti-intellectual undercurrent in much of modern American Christianity. When you look at the evangelicals in particular, rejection. I just did a whole video about evolution and things that people believe about it that are actually fundamentally wrong. But we reject science, or at least reject conclusions of science we dislike. That doesn't appear anywhere in the Screwtape Letters. In fact, Screwtape warns Wormtail to guide his. They always call the human the patient. He's never given a name in the book. He's given a name in the audio drama because you actually have him talking, interacting with people. But to guide the patient's mind away from the science, the sciences, or at least the heavier sciences, particularly physics, because very much what Screwtape's trying to encourage is Wormtail to do, and what the ultimate goal here is to get the guy focused on himself, not focused on the outer. And the argument that by contemplating the universe, by contemplating physics, by contemplating these deeper mysteries, it takes you out of your head in such a way that it actually can often lead to God instead of away from God. And I think that's absolutely true, as long as we're not dealing with a very rigid sense of God that precludes scientific advancement. Or precludes or rejects ideas like the Big Bang or evolution because they don't fit your idea of God or God's creation. And again, it's Lewis's brilliance that it's like, no, you need to think about this. Another thing that makes it unusual, at least in terms of modern Christian mindset, is, the patient eventually converts to Christianity, and there's certainly a variety of Christian sects. Once you convert, if you honestly convert, that's it, you're saved, it's over, there's nothing to worry about. Screwtape's not pleased with the conversion and references that Wormtail will be punished for it. But it's treated as, no, we can still work with this. There's a series of advice about avoiding, what sort of people you should try and deal with, sticking with worldly friends, sticking with friends that are hip and new. And it's definitely where it's an anti-intellectual bent to the book. There's decidedly condemnation of trendiness, and let's face it, it's very real that many people have a tendency to latch onto a new idea or go to a new club, do something because it's the new thing, it's the big thing, it's hot, and that's again what Lewis is presenting demons to want in this is they want us focused on ideas because it's brave and it's bold and it's brilliant and it's new. So I should believe it because of all of these things. Never mind why. When you look at a scientific theory, that it's the big new popular thing is a terrible reason to believe it. You should look into the studies that have been done, look into the evidence, not just the general public believes it. Because lo and behold, look around and you can find thousands of examples of ideas that were put forward that scientific studies suggested. People latched onto them, and they were rapidly discredited, but people just ran away with it. The biggest and most obvious example of this is diet fads. The Atkins diet. All these other diets. Cut out carbs. Too many carbs are what's causing you to gain weight. And people just leap from one to the next, to the next, to the next, without understanding the science behind it, without researching into it further. And lo and behold, that one study quickly gets overturned. But often, new study proves that vitamin C cures disease is usually bigger news than that study. Study saying vitamin C cures disease was proven biased and improbable. I'm not necessarily picking on vitamin C, although people do make ridiculous claims about it. It's just the point that big claim gets made, big earth-shaking claim. You see this in cancer research all the time. That's front page news. When they figure out they made a mistake and they jumped the gun, that's, somewhere up just behind the sports section is a footnote on a page is a retraction. And again, through the course of the series of the book, it's discussions about how he relates to people, how to twist people around, how to look at, talking about the man lives with his mother. And what about his mother bugs him? Because you live with anybody for any length of time. They have habits you dislike, tones you dislike. And get him to focus on those things. And even as a Christian, to focus on why her doing those things is so wrong. And downplaying what he does, the fact that he does the same sorts of things that drive her crazy too. To go into church and look at the people around him and think about flaw, some inherent flaw, whether if it's a real flaw, wonderful thing. If it's some petty little thing, they don't kneel quite as fast. They mispronounce a word in a song or a prayer, and how sinful and how imperfect and how unpleasing to God that person is. Never thinking about his own failings in the same sense, because we're all human, we all make those mistakes. Um, of course, it's easier if they make big, if the guy sitting next to you in church is, he's cheating on his wife and his taxes. It's really easy to think how much holier. It's that holier than thou attitude specifically that Lewis is addressing, and saying that demons love this holier than thou attitude, which makes an enormous amount of sense to me, because you know Christians and religious people in general generally are supposed to believe pride is a virtue, or not pride, humility is a virtue. And getting into this holier than thou attitude, which is so common, look at Christians today. There's some of them that are steeped in it, and that is so counterproductive to Christ's message. We're supposed to forgive people their the Lord's Prayer, one of the great prayers of Christianity, forgive us as we forgive those who trespass. As we forgive those who do something wrong to us, forgive us. Not forgive other people for all the horrible things they did to me. Get other people to fix what they're doing wrong to me. Outward, not inward. Another idea that I find this premise that while demons can influence the mind, they can hear thoughts. They can hear when God speaks to someone. They can't hear it directly, so they're always trying to guess what God said, and more specifically, that when God's presence is really there, Lewis describes it like a stench. It's just the person is surrounded by this great cloud that the demons can't even enter, and that's how people are always surrounded by this. I don't want to get too more into analyzing it because I don't want to give too much away. But it is a phenomenal book. I will say one other thing that I think is an interesting thing to consider is he talks about specifically virtues. And this is an idea that appears in his other books. The third book of the Space Trilogy talks about this too. When we think of the devil, we think of him being incredibly intelligent, beautiful, and cunning, and capable of and great speaker, and all these other things. And well, the problem Lewis sees in this is these are virtues. Demons as creatures naturally of vice aren't natural. The virtue doesn't come naturally to them. They can't inspire even when virtue, you can twist it around and have it lead into sin. Bravery becoming bravado, which is a good thing, becoming bravado, or overriding sense of self-preservation, taking a degree of pride in your works, becoming true pride, the arrogant pride, natural human sexual desire becoming base lust. There's a philosophical argument about the nature of evil, that evil isn't independent, and I'm going to do an episode about this in the future, that evil doesn't independently exist. It's simply a predation, a twisting of what is virtuous. But it needs those things. The other interesting point, of course, making that, because they're talking, the book takes place broadly during the Second World War, and talking about how to deal with the fact that because he's a Christian, currently he's in a saved state, a state of salvation. If he dies, hell loses, and the soul goes to heaven. It's so needing him to avoid, because he's volunteered to be an or air raid marshal, telling people, when the bombs are coming, he has to be outside, he has to risk his life. How do you deal with that and keep him alive? And the obvious answer would be cowardice, to inspire cowardice. But that being very difficult because of all the, while they've, many of the other sins, greed is good, lust being lust, everything people can be proud of, it's impossible to make someone proud of being a coward. So it's hard to manifest that particular vice. Again, it's a really phenomenal book. Remember, on audible.com, trial.com/ paranormal E, you can go, if you aren't a member of Audible, you can go get a free audio book copy of it right now. Yeah, this episode's going to be a little bit of a advertisement, I suppose. But they're also really good books, and I think they're worth checking out. So, The Great Divorce is. I read Screwtape years and years and years ago. Being a demonologist, the whole. It's demons talking to demons was an obvious read for me. And it doesn't deal over much with the spiritual side of it, though there's a brief discussion where Wormtail wants to. Or about Wormtail wanting to appear to the patient in his own demonic self, and that being something that Hell's currently avoiding. But The Great Divorce is a different matter entirely. I didn't hear about this until years later from my friend, the late Father Joseph Brose, who recommended it to me. And you could almost call The Great Divorce as a cosmic road trip. For real quick, if you're wondering where the name The Great Divorce came from, there's a poem by William Blake, the great English poet. I want to say 19th century, 19th or 18th, who wrote a poem, "The Marriage of Heaven and Hell," and Lewis acknowledges in his introduction is a great poem, and he can't. He's certainly in no position to comment on what that means. What was meant by that, let alone anything else. But so if Heaven and Hell is married, it's a huge, great marriage. So it's the Great Divorce, and the story of the Great Divorce starts out in a city, in a city in twilight. Darkness just coming on, the sun's going down, and the city is huge, huge. That, but there's a bus stop. Our narrator's thinking about all the people further out and how it would take years, centuries, thousands of years to get there. That some of the distances to the furthest house might even be going in so far as light years. And there's this concept here that these millions of people from all throughout history, in different times of life, but what happens is they start living together, and then eventually they get tired of each other, and they move further away and further away, to the point the ones that have been there the longest are so sick of everyone else, they're just pushed as far away from anyone else, and anytime someone new moves near them, they move further away, and create more of it. So there's even a story of how the closest of all the great figures of history, and this is written 1940s, 1950s. These would be, or I'm pretty sure 1940s, because World War II era. But the greatest of these figures would be Napoleon Bonaparte. And so two of them decided to go see Napoleon, and they traveled for thousands of years. It was that far away. And they found this big, elaborate house lit by candles. And they looked inside the window, and they could see Napoleon walking in circles, muttering to himself, just lost inside of himself. And that's an important idea we'll get back to. But there's also this idea that nothing here is real. The houses are creations of these people's minds, and they're flimsy. There's a comment that if it rained, they wouldn't keep out the rain, let alone whatever's coming when darkness comes. There's this dread of whatever's coming with the darkness. So anyway, into this not little, huge city comes a bus. People all line up at the bus stop and get onto the bus. And there's something special about the driver that they can't really quite see him. And after everybody who wants to get on and loaded up, it takes off. Into the air, no less. And flies and flies and flies. At one point, there's a series of discussions between the narrator and the various people on the bus. At one point, he looks down and you can see this crevice in the earth that they're flying away from, that they clearly have come out of. And they come to this new land. And it's gorgeous and it's beautiful, and the mountains in the distance where the city they've come from is the twilight on the edge of night. This is a land of the sunrise. The sun is in the distance over the mountains, and but the people are barely real here. They're ghosts. The narrator calls them such repeatedly, and everything because they're so unreal. Everything else is so real. Even the blades of grass cut into their feet. They can walk on the rivers because the rivers are more solid than they are, but every step's painful. And they're met there by these other beings. These other beings are beautiful, glorious, shining light. But they're all people that the narrators know. Or, excuse me, people on the bus knew in life. And they each have a conversation with this person. The narrator talks about them. And it's about the various things that these people, what held these people back from God in life. And again, it's not necessarily condemnation it's not a condemnation of different religious beliefs. Just more modes of thinking, modes of being. I think a big example is a woman who became obsessed with her son. Not that, she's a mother, it's natural for her to love her child, but to the point that she neglected her daughter, to the point that she neglected her husband, to the point very much that she turned her son into an idol, and just, she's here in heaven, she's just left hell, and all she could talk about is, you have to show me my son, how dare you not show me my son, it's her own brother that's come to meet her. And she doesn't care. She doesn't care how he's doing. She doesn't care about him. She just cares about her son. Another real good example is a man who's more of a philosophical bent, talking about the idea of heaven, the idea of God, and it's like, and answering the questions. And I can sympathize a lot with that because I do have that innate human curiosity to find out. But it's, well, okay, come with me. We can go meet God and find out the answer. It's like, but the guy's so obsessed with the journey and the question and the philosophy, it's kind of a forest for the trees situation. And it goes on, and we see several of these meetings, and some people don't simply want to do it. There's another interesting instance with a man who has a creature on a leash. And the creature is, talking to him and telling him what to do. And an angel appears. The angel asks permission to kill it, and it's like, well, no, he's no bother. I mean, may I kill it, sir? But he's no bother. I mean, he's not usually like this. I mean, it's okay. And like, please, sir, may I kill it? And he kills it and turns on the great steed that the man rides off on. Talking about the nature of. Because it represented, I forget, pride or greed or some petty emotion, and then turning that into what it's supposed to be in service of God and helping the man on his journey. And what's interesting, eventually the narrator himself meets his own guide, and they talk about it, and they talk about the nature of this place, and they talk about the nature of the place that he's been, and this premise that the city. Because the narrator obviously wants to know, is the city hell or is the city purgatory? And the narrator goes, to those who come here and move on and go accept their failings and travel on to meet God, they will look back at that time and see it as purgatory. To those who return there, because ultimately it is a choice, they'll realize it has always been hell. Even going so far as to comment that to people in heaven, people who really eventually embrace the divine, everything in their life, when they look back on their life, they'll think to themselves, I have always been in heaven. Whereas those who are damned will look back and realize they were in hell all along. What's also really interesting here is just this concept. And there is definitely the intentional implication that hell is waiting for, eventually the sun will set, the demons will come, and hell will become far more horrible than it is. But in large part here, hell isn't physical pain the way we would think of it. It's being trapped inside of yourself. being trapped inside of. Often they comment eventually that it's being trapped inside of a single emotional experience and not being able to move out of it. Hence, Napoleon just walking mindlessly in circles, muttering to himself over and over and over and over. You know, even commenting, you know, that those in hell do in fact get vacations. Some of them choose to come to this land, which isn't heaven per se. He calls the land downstairs the shadow of death, and where they are the shadow of life, and it's the eventual journey towards God. But some of them choose to go there. Some of them ultimately come back to play pranks and terrorize the living. Again, getting tied into these emotional self-feeding loops that ultimately don't get corrected. But there's definitely this premise, and it influenced later writers. There's a great novel I'll probably do a review on down the road. Actually, pair of novels. One called Inferno by Larry Niven, and I forget the other guy's name, in the Escape from Hell, which is a modern retelling of Dante in light of the Great Divorce, in fact. But ultimately, that there is a way out of hell by rejecting sin and accepting God. And that journey is the central point of this book. There's another wonderful image, and I didn't want to make a very long video today, so I'll probably be closing up just after this. Of eventually, while all this is going on, and he's talking to his guide, this beautiful, glorious woman, clothed in, bathed in light, with countless animals and children around her, so beautiful, so glorious, so amazing. The narrator asks his guide, "Is that the Virgin? Is that the Madonna? Is that the Virgin?" And the guide kind of laughs. It's like, "No, it's Sarah Smith." And it's like, "Who? I've never heard of her." And it's like, "You wouldn't have." But what made her so remarkable in life, what gave her such glory in the afterlife, is the way that she treated everyone. Every person she came in contact with, even if it was just the kid bringing the paper or the milk, she treated like her own son or daughter. Every animal loved, compassionate, kindness, helped them if they were injured. And because just these simple acts of kindness gave her so much glory in heaven. And now, of course, she comes back to try to help people move on. The last image I think I want to leave you with, because it really says something, drives home, I think, Lewis's point about the ultimately petty nature of evil, and self-consuming nature of evil. They're talking about the place that he's been to, and, well, why don't these guides go down to hell itself to help people? Or one of the men had wanted to take a fruit, because he thought if you get one real thing from here, and take it back with him. What kind? Because down it's hell, they didn't have an economy, but because whatever they wanted, they could just poof, it's there, but none of it's real. But if you bring something real down there, it have value. He can become rich. But so the narrator laughs at all of this, and just explains it's not possible. He takes a blade of grass, just one blade of grass, and uses the very tip of it to point to a crack in the ground. It's that small a crack, only the tip of a blade of grass. And everything, that giant city, where light years of travel to get to the bus stop, was contained in this tiny little crack in the ground. The evil, wickedness, sinfulness is ultimately minor, insignificant, and petty. I think, a really cool concept. I happen to like it. Instead, people make a big deal. The devil is this big and powerful and cosmic being, and granted he is, but the choices he made, the reason he was condemned, are not big and awesome and grandiose. They're ultimately petty and selfish and vindictive and sad and small. Both of these are phenomenal books, and I want to note, before anyone tries to take theology out of the Great Divorce, Lewis himself posits it as a dream. not something. He does not want people to build the whole theology out of it. But I do like this idea that I'm personally a subscriber to the premise: heaven or hell is ultimately a personal choice. And I do personally like this idea that a door still is open for salvation up to a point until you choose to close it, even briefly after you die. Check them out. Again, one last plug. You can go check out these books and literally thousands more on Audible, audibletrial.com/paranormally, audibletrial.com/paranormally. Sign up, you get a free membership, you get a free book. You can check out one of these books I mentioned, you can check out one of Brian McKinley's books. You can go check out something else by some current or past author. There's no end of options. I definitely recommend it, and it'll help if I always talk about our patreon.com/demonology. If you want to help the show out and you don't have money, signing up for an account is free, and will directly help the show continue. And also, of course, like, comment, share, subscribe, or even dislike if you didn't like what I have to say. I want to thank you all for listening, and have a wonderful day, and God bless. We'll be back tomorrow night. Remember, Thursday, 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We will be discussing live critical thinking. I am planning on taking an entire bottle of homeopathic sleeping pills to make a point. I just have to pick it up. It may get delayed a week if I can't find it, or money's limited. If I can't afford it, I may have to wait. But it will be happening in the near future. We will be talking about homeopathy. Good night. God bless. See you next